Welcome to the Africa Climate Summit.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. This is a historic event, obviously the largest gathering on the continent in living memory on the issue of climate change. Tell us who you are and why you're here.
My name is Ademola Ajagbe. I'm the Africa Regional Managing Director at the Nature Conservancy TNC. The Nature Conservancy is one of the largest global conservation organizations. We are in 80 countries globally, and in Africa we have presence in 9 countries.
Okay. And what is the mandate or what is the objective of the Nature Conservancy?
Our mission is to protect the land and water on which all life form depends. But to put it in a very simple term, it's really about protecting nature and preserving life. It's really making sure that conservation is based on right-based approach, meaning we're empowering people, we're protecting nature with people and for people.
It sounds like an enormous undertaking. This summit is about Africa's response to climate change and what the continent is going to do about climate change. In which ways is this relevant to your organization, and why did you decide to lead a delegation to the Africa Climate Summit?
First up, the Africa Climate Summit is spectacular in many respects. This is the first ever that we're having on the continent, which is really remarkable. And I'd like to start by commending the government of Kenya, President Ruto to be precise, for taking the audacious step to say, we need to have this kind of dialogue on the continent, and Kenya is going to play host. Of course, Kenya being the mecca for wildlife, not just in Africa, but globally, is the right place to have the summit, the first one. This is different. Why? Because we're seeing 28 African presidents here. We're seeing more than 40 African ministers here. I was told that more than 30,000 people have registered for the summit. And beyond just a talk, we're seeing huge political will and commitment in terms of what we need to do as Africa when it comes to climate negotiation. So in previous years and decades, Africa has always taken somewhat the backseat in terms of how do we really get a good fare of the pie. But this time around, we're coming forward and being very proactive to say, no, let's change the narrative. Let's have a dialogue between the North and the South in terms of what are the issues we're facing when it comes to climate. And how do we address climate impact at scale, both on the continent and beyond. I mean, I like what President Ruto said yesterday. He said, Africa's moment is the world's moment. And I think we're seizing that moment right now. Beyond that, we've seen huge commitment in terms of financing, because one of the major gaps when it comes to climate change has been financing. So yesterday, there were very audacious commitment in terms of financing. And one of them was around $650 million to support climate financing on the continent, which is good. There were many other commitments made and announced yesterday, which is really remarkable. Another one that we've seen is there's going to be a very strong instrument coming out of this document, coming out of this summit, called the Nairobi Declaration. And what that would do basically is to provide a roadmap in terms of all these conversations we're having, the commitment we're seeing, how will that translate into practice on the continent? The last point I'll make is the collaboration between Africa and many other partners. Europe came out boldly to say we want to see increased collaboration with Africa. The United States said the same thing. The Middle East said the same thing. So Africa taking this audacious and very proactive step is making partners around the world to say, how do we deepen the collaboration around climate challenges?
Fantastic. And what is your assessment of where Africa currently is positioned and stands on the issue of the global response to climate change?
Yeah.
And do you think the continent is getting it right in terms of positioning itself and speaking with one voice?
I think with this summit, we're getting it right when it comes to having one voice. Because before now, there's always been different views, and for very good reasons. So no blame game there. But With the summit, the African leaders are coming around one voice to say, okay, how do we engage in making sure we, one, identify the major issues we're facing as a continent, but number two is how do we dialogue with the rest of the world in a manner that helps to advance commitment around climate change. Now, when it comes to global response to climate change, we are way behind. And I'll tell you what. Number one, just looking at deforestation, to end deforestation by 2050, we need average, based on analysts' estimate, we need about $3.5 billion annually, not for the, the entire period, just annually, $3.5 billion will be required. The other thing is we'll need about $300 billion, 3.5 trillion, not billion. We'll need $300 billion annually to address climate change by 2030. But if you ask me where we are right now, the world made a commitment way back to provide $100 billion annually for climate mitigation and adaptation, not just in Africa, the global south. And that commitment was not honored. But so if you compare 300 billion to 100 billion, there's a far cry there. So we're really not doing much. And in Africa, looking at the issue of climate change, the estimate is we need about $120 billion annually. And if we don't do that, the challenge is we'll continue to face the impact of climate change. And I'll give you a practical example. Last year, I visited one of the communities in Samburu. This is a typical pastoralist community, and I like the way the community embrace their culture and natural heritage, which also helps them to preserve nature, as we've seen across the country and in many other parts of the continent. But in these pastoralist communities, there was no single blade of grass. That's telling. Meaning, climate change is not one of those things we talk about in the future or abstract. It's really facing us right now. I mean, Kenya has had issues with persistent drought for 3 years, and it's not only here, in other African countries as well. There's been flood and many other natural disasters everywhere, and there's a cost element that we're not paying attention. So in terms of what we need to do, a lot more needs to be done.
Fantastic. Final question. This is a large gathering.
Yeah.
Over 30,000 people, it's reported, are attending. There are concerns, there are worries that this will be just another meeting. How would you, as an organization, as a voice in this conversation and debate, what would you define as success? And how would this summit need to yield the kind of results you would like to see? How would you define the success of the Africa Climate Summit?
So what success will look like is this Nairobi Declaration we're talking about being that will provide a roadmap in terms of what Africa needs to do to respond to the impact of climate change. It will be good to see it feature at the Global Climate Convention. That is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. There's going to be a meeting later this year in UAE. And as you see that fitting into the decision coming out of the climate change convention, but beyond that is how do we turn that roadmap from a plan to practice? That's the key thing that I would like to see. But there are two things that we're seeing as challenges, as opportunities as well. One is about financing. A lot of talks, no financing. And from the Nature Conservancy, one of the financial mechanisms we've been able to create is debt for nature swap. What it basically does is it helps countries to refinance part of their sovereign debt. And the savings from that is committed to conservation purposes and also helps them to meet their national commitment. So to put it in a very simplistic term, say you're a father of 2 girls and you have a huge commitment to make, as many other fathers do. I'm a father of 2 girls, and you want to educate your children. But maybe you're owing someone, say, $10,000, and you say, okay, I need money to educate my children. And you go to your creditor to say, can we renegotiate the repayment plan and reduce the repayment period from 5 to 8 years and reduce the interest rate from 10% to 8%? That saving is now locked for education. That's something similar to how debt for nature swap works. And we have helped several governments, including in Africa, two African governments with debt swap. The first one was Seychelles in 2015 to protect the ocean. Very recently, we did something similar with the government of Gabon to refinance $500 million of their sovereign debt. And that would generate $163 million for ocean conservation, but also will support their blue economy agenda. This is an opportunity we've seen that many other countries can benefit from. And as the Nature Conservancy, we supported countries or sovereign states to refinance more than $1.2 billion of their sovereign debt to generate $400 million in new financing for nature and climate resilience. And that's also helping in meeting national commitment. Like every country has what is called nationally determined contribution, meaning what's Kenya's role, or Tanzania's role, or any other country's role, contribution to mitigating and adapting to impact of climate change. Another thing we've seen is how do we create access to the carbon finance or carbon market? Because there's so much commitment. Money is touched in the global north, but we're not seeing it trickle down. And there are two major challenges. One is about the capacity and the capability to access the financing, which is really very limited across the continent. So we created an accelerator program called Africa Forest Carbon Catalyst. What it does is it provides a technical assistance to community-based organizations to access the carbon market, to develop carbon projects, but also provide this upfront financing to design projects, which is really a big challenge that we're seeing right now. And there are many more initiatives we've seen around the continent, but we need to scale. That's the issue. So the point is about how do we broaden the access to the carbon market space.
Great. Thank you very much for the interview, and thank you for coming to the Africa Climate Summit talk show. And I hope that this summit is going to be a success.
Looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.